Hello, I'm Matthew Malcolm with Pacific Nut Producer Magazine, reporting to you here today from the Willamette Valley in Oregon. I'm here with Marissa Lane-Massee. She is a master's student at the University of Oregon, but she also, comes from a family hazelnut farm. Where was that farm located?
Salem.
Oh, Salem, and we're right here in Salem. That's awesome. Well, I wanted to talk with you today. I think you have a very interesting perspective of having the family farm application to some of the research that you're working on, particularly with cover crops, and trying to find out, from talking to so many different hazelnut growers, it's sort of a whatever you prefer, right? Because
Right.
I've heard growers that just have bare soil, and that works just fine for them. Other growers have grass. I've heard of even some trying to profit off of the first few years of an orchard's life with, growing strawberries or melons or even pumpkins, maybe, I don't know. But a lot of different options, and people are trying to make the most of their land. But thinking about what's the most efficient use of that space that's going to really benefit your hazelnut orchards in the long run and be economical. That's what you're working on, right? Can you
Right.
tell us about it?
So I grew up as a hazelnut farmer. I'm a fourth generation hazelnut farmer. And coming to the University of Oregon, I studied cover crops. I specifically look at native cover crops inside of hazelnut orchards in an effect to improve harvesting methods for farmers, improve efficiency of labor, of fuel costs, and of just general management practices inside of hazelnut orchards. Now, native cover crops are a little more interesting than conventional cover crops because it's not something you see day to day. It's hard to find, but perfect implementation for hazelnut farmers.
So you're saying native. Can you give us some examples of some native cover crops that you've been investigating?
So some people may hear of like camas or checker mallow, phacelia, native wildflowers. We don't use native grasses because when you go to harvest, grass entangles nuts. And so the wildflowers that we use can be flailed down to nothing. So you have a completely clear orchard floor. You harvest over the top. And then once the fall rains come, they grow right from the root base, and you have a cover crop again. You never, ever have to reseed. It's a one-time input, and then you're done. And you just flail it down, and it comes right back up.
So we've done some practical orchard trials on this, and what is your best advice? You mentioned that using this one-time seeded cover crop, and that was, remind me what was this native crop you're talking about, or are you recommending multiple different kinds?
Absolutely. So we're recommending multiple different cover crop combinations for different farms. So instead of a blanket cover crop put in all types of orchards, what we do is we look at the orchard canopy density, and then we target plants that can grow in that amount of sunlight or that soil type. And so right now we work in open canopy orchards, in mixed canopy orchards, and closed canopy orchards. We customize cover crops to put those in people's orchards, see how they work, and then change the species as needed that meets their needs as farmers.
So yeah, I understand. In the first several years of an orchard's life, there's a lot more sunlight, right? But over time, with these older orchards, there's not a lot of sunlight. So did you find that the combination of native cover crops was survived
Yes.
for those older orchards?
Yes. So, sunlight competition is basically everything in the cover crop world and hazelnut industry. So we found best cover crops work in mixed canopy orchards. So if you have an older orchard that's become a little patchy, or if you have a younger orchard that's reaching maturity, it is like the perfect time for cover crops and also minimalized weed suppression or accelerated weed suppression. When you go into the two extremes of really open canopy, you get a lot more weeds, and if you go into the extreme of really dark, nothing grows. But native plants are so adaptable because,
they're native.
They're native, right? They've been here forever. So they are so good at accommodating for those needs. So right now we have a test in a really dark canopy orchard. It's like a 6-year-old Barcelona orchard.
Okay.
It's old. There's so much darkness, but the native plants grow. They like it. They compete with the weeds, and they don't get eaten by any of the things that live in the surrounding areas. And then you just come through, mow it, harvest, it grows back, and it's done. It's very low maintenance.
And it kind of stays out of the way of your regular orchard practice, is what you're saying.
Yes. And so one thing that we work on really hard is making sure that we don't attract beneficial insects in a way that when you go through and you spray for filbert worm, they get killed. So one of the things that we do is we make sure that they flower and go to seed before you would regularly spray for filbert worm. You mow them down, you spray for filbert worm, and then you just go on with your normal orchard practices.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because so it seems like timing is really key.
Absolutely.
But as a native cover crop, so the low maintenance sounds pretty good, right? And it's a one and done planting, and hopefully you've got it set for the next 30 years or so.
Right.
Exactly.
And on top of that, all of these native plants attract native insects that are predators to the pests that come into the orchard. So you've got a plant that facilitates, parasitic wasp growth. And so if you have a lot of that in your orchard, you get a lot of parasitic wasps that parasitize filbert worm, and then you reduce your filbert worm population on top of, your normal treatments.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us today, and for being at the University of Oregon, and with your perspective here as a family farmer. Do you plan to continue working that family farm into the future?
Yeah, I do. Fourth generation, I'm pretty much locked in. You can't leave at this point.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. Read more about these things in Pacific Nut Producer Magazine at Matthew Malcolm, PacificNutProducer.com.